It's the Eagle Community Television Forum with your host, Gary Shorman.
Hi everyone, I'm Gary Shorman and this is the Forum on Eagle Community Television. It's great to have you watching along. We're going to be talking about water and maybe some of the water numbers that you hear and where they come from. Our guest is Nathan Sullivan and he's a hydrologic tech here in Hays based out of the USGS, the United States Geological Survey. And Nathan, good to have you here today.
Thank you for having me. Good to be
You know
here.
what, first off, how big of area do you cover? And then we'll talk about the USGS office here.
Sure. Well, in Kansas, we have 3 offices. We've got an office in Lawrence, that's our main water science center, and then we've got field offices in Wichita and out here in Hays. Out of the Hays office, we cover roughly the western half of the state. We have about 60 sites that we monitor.
And so that's the whole western half of the state that you get to cover at some point with.
yeah,
How many other people work here in Hays with you?
We just have a total of 3 of us right now running these sites in Hays.
So somebody out there watching, they say USGS, what exactly do you do? Is that just another government program? What's going on with the USGS?
Well, the USGS is a data collection, science data collection agency. We're under the Department of Interior, and we are an unbiased, objective science data collection agency tasked with monitoring our natural resources. In Kansas, we are a water science center, so we focus on water issues here. That entails surface water, so your flow in some of the creeks and rivers and some of the lakes. We monitor some of the lake elevations. And then we also do some groundwater work, monitoring the groundwater elevations. And we also do a little bit of water quality work at just a few of our sites.
Well, that covers quite a bit of area. Frank, not only area of the state, but when you take a look at monitoring those different things. On a typical day, Nathan gets in his USGS vehicle and heads out. What do you do on a typical day?
Well, we each kind of have an area of sites that we cover. So my area would be the far southwest part of the state. So about every 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks, we will make a trip and visit all the sites in our area. So I would head down toward the southwest part of the state and cover several sites along the Arkansas River from the state line near Coolidge all the way to Dodge City. And the sites that have flow, we will measure those, measure the flow in the river. And the sites that are dry, we just make sure our equipment is operating correctly still and that we're ready if and when some flow returns.
Well, you and I were talking, guys, there's some times of the year in western Kansas, especially southwest even more so, where some of the rivers don't have any flow. Exactly. And so the flow meters are probably more like wind speed indicators down there watching that, but they do have to work. How do those work?
Well, what we do, we have equipment in one of the small shelters that you may see up near the corner of a bridge. And what that has is a pipe that goes down to the stream. And that equipment is just measuring pressure. So as water comes up there, it exerts pressure on there. So it measures the pressure at the end of that pipe and it converts that pressure to a height of water. It's a known equation as to the pressure in PSI related to feet of water.
Now, is that recorded there then, or is it electronically transmitted?
Well, it's recorded on site, and then every once an hour, it takes a reading every 15 minutes, and then once an hour, it transmits that past hour's readings up to a satellite, which in turn comes back down to a downlink and ends up on the web page. So when you look at our web page, the data should always be about an hour or less old. So.
Well, it is interesting because there's several government agencies, the Weather Service, National Weather Service, NOAA actually does collection of weather data that's transmitted on. Right. Where does most of your data go? It goes to a web page, but then what happens when you're looking at the Arkansas River down there and it's at 4 foot versus 12 foot, whatever?
Right.
What happens with that data?
Well, numerous agencies will use that at some point. You mentioned the National Weather Service. They have the data on their web page also. that comes directly from our gauges. So during times of flood, especially is when you hear about the National Weather Service so much doing their flood forecasting. So, excuse me, they will use our data, and then they will model it and come up with the flood forecast. So when you hear a National Weather Service flood forecast of such and such feet, they're looking at our data, and then they're coming up with their forecasting as to how high they think the river will get at a given point.
You know, that is a science, because you can see as that starts coming up how you can start projecting where that is,
Right.
especially looking upstream. You mentioned there are 60 sites, because many times you're driving along one of the roads in Kansas and you'll see one of those little boxes and
Sure.
a dish off to the side going, I wonder what that does and
Right.
where that goes. So that comes back to your office here. Does it go to a national headquarters and then it's distributed to every
First
office?
to out on the East Coast is the downlink, I believe, and then it in turn goes through our system in the Lawrence office and onto the web page from there.
I'm going to talk about some different areas of the state, but first off, do you have any friends when you signed up for this job saying, I'm going to go monitor water in western Kansas, and they just kind of go, yeah, right, where is it? Are you supposed to find it or what? Do you get that feedback? Because we do we're in a very arid part of the state.
Exactly, we are, and you know, these past few years especially have been awfully dry. You know, when I started in 2001, there was a lot more water around, but about that time, things really started declining. So I've kind of seen the spectrum of normal, what we like to think was normal, you know, to the extreme drought that we've been in. You know, we did see some relief in parts of the western part of the state this past year. And,
well, you brought a chart along that really talks about that a little bit, or it shows that. I'm not going to be able to show this chart on screen, but basically it goes back to January of 2014, which would be a little over a year and a month ago. And you look back at that chart, and the water level was about a little over 1,900 feet above sea level. And then you see this big spike where it goes up about 5 or 6 feet. And that had to do with really the rainfall that we had in September of last year, or end of July of last year.
This was from one of the monitoring wells that we have down near Shenshin along the Smoky Hill River. And you know, things have been awfully dry, as everybody in this area knows, and that's been an issue down there. But we did get some good rains between Cedar Bluff Reservoir and the Shenshin well field.
And you see that in the spike, and then it dropped down, and then all of a sudden in January from some of the snowfall, I assume.
Well, for snowfall, and as the trees go dormant for the year, and they're not pulling groundwater anymore, then we will generally get some natural recharge into the system, and oftentimes see some base flow come back to these streams.
And you see that as it's jumped up now into the last reading, looks like the end of January here, and you can see that it's at the highest level it's been in, you know, since January of last year.
Exactly.
Which it was there. So that's encouraging to see that it recharges so quickly.
Exactly.
How does the office here compare to like Lawrence, Kansas, where there's a lot more water? What do they do differently in that office than what you do out here?
Well, you know, the focus can be different in different parts of the state, because as you mentioned, they obviously have a lot more water to deal with. So they do more water quality issues out there, have more water quality monitoring sites. And some of the flooding is a bigger issue out here. Out here, it's usually a lack of water, and the other agencies that use our data to make important day-to-day management decisions oftentimes are as interested or more interested in the very low flow. So that's some of the big focus that we see among some of the other state and federal agencies that use our data, is looking at the very low flow and making sure that we get them the most accurate numbers that we can possibly get, all the way down to zero flow.
How did you get started being a hydrotech? Is that what it's called, a hydrotech?
Yeah, hydrotech.
Yeah. Did you go to hydrotech school?
Well, you know, I was actually in the biology program at Fort Hays here, and one of my classes had a field visit with my former boss to see a USGS stream gauging station. And I went out there and thought, this is kind of cool. This is kind of interesting. I've never, wasn't really familiar with what all the USGS did other than volcanoes and earthquakes and maps and the more visible things that people might associate the USGS with. So during that time, they were getting ready to hire a student position, a student intern for the summer. And I liked the sound of it and got involved and was able to get that student job, and it just morphed into a full-time position. Just things worked out right to where as I finished up college, I could get into a full-time position. And
well, it's great because you
there
produced some
since.
interesting numbers. And we're going to come back and talk a little bit. You mentioned wells and how you monitor wells, because well water, there's several versions of that. We'll talk about that. We'll also talk about where you can go to find some of the numbers, some of the data that Nathan digs up and, well, I guess gets on paper as they take a look at water in western Kansas. Nathan Sullivan's our guest. He's with the USGS. We'll be back with more after this.
HaysMed is your first and best choice for healthcare. They're the only facility providing tertiary level services in this region. With more than 70 physicians and 26 specialties ranging from heart, orthopedic, spine care, cancer, obstetrics and gynecology, wound care, rehabilitation and surgery, including the Da Vinci robotic surgery, HaysMed is your comprehensive health provider for people throughout western Kansas. HaysMed, helping people be healthy.
It's a beautiful day in our super high-speed internet great customer service neighborhood. Like you, this is where we live. In fact, our company is employee-owned, so it's our goal to improve the quality of life for everyone in our community by delivering faster, more reliable internet, clearer, more feature-laden phone service, quality TV channels, all with the level of customer service you'd expect from people who are your neighbors. Eagle Communications, our community connected.
Welcome back to the second half of our forum program here on Eagle Community Television. We record this program every Monday over in our studios at our Eagle Media Center on Hall Street. It's good to have you watching along, and if you have questions or thoughts about future programs, I'd like you to send them to me. My address, email-wise, is gary.shorman@eaglecom.net. You can also go online. If you're on Facebook, you'll see a picture of Nathan and I on our Facebook page. It's ECTV Forum. You can also leave a message for us there as well. Our guest is Nathan Sullivan. He's with the USGS. He's a hydrotech, the short term for that. He checks on water, checks data from water around the western half of the state. Two things I want to talk about coming back is one, well water, because we talked about the data in that one well, the rain, how it filled it up at the Shinshin well field, but how many other wells do you check, and do you actually go and check groundwater for irrigation and things like that that become so important for not only farmers, but really all of us in the state?
Sure. Yeah, groundwater is a very vital resource to the western part of Kansas and all of the high plains, really. The western part of the state overlies the High Plains Aquifer, or commonly known as the Ogallala Aquifer, and that is very important for agricultural use as well as municipal use, livestock, other things. And recently we've seen some new work come our way, kind of dealing with some of those issues. We have recently installed several groundwater wells in the far southwest part of the state to help collect some data so that people can start to see that on a real-time basis on the internet. There's lots of wells that have historically had some data collected, but it was never real-time data on the web all the time for people to see. So we are getting into some more of that, and hopefully some more opportunities will come to have more of those gauges like that.
Your job is not, other than reporting data, but when you see those trends, the common thinking is that groundwater is becoming more shallow, or it's dropping. Mm-hmm. Is that what you see in the numbers, or is there enough numbers to tell, or do they need to go to the website to find that out?
Excuse me. Well, it does depend on what area you're talking about. The High Plains Aquifer has been utilized for many, many years, and it is on a continual decline. And you'll hear a lot about some of the things that the governor and different state agencies and different agencies that do some other work with that, some of the steps that they're taking to try to make that resource last longer. You know, our focus is strictly collect the best data possible so that the people in the positions to make decisions can manage things the best they can. Now, the aquifer, you know, near Shinchin, that's a different type of aquifer. That would be an alluvial aquifer, which would be, you know, right along the stream. So those types of aquifers recharge very quickly when you get flow in the river. Now your deeper aquifers that aren't tied to a specific river system, those take much longer and much more rainfall to see significant recharge.
Is that like centuries or decades or just a long time?
Yeah, exactly. And at this point, you know, it may never be what it once was before the aquifer was developed for all the different uses, but yeah.
It makes a difference.
Exactly.
If somebody wants to follow up on these numbers, where do they go? Where's the website where they can go and see, here's the numbers that Nathan was talking about on this program, and just kind of compare and take a look at some of those things?
Sure. Our data is available to the public. Like I said, you know, we're a data collection agency. We're a government agency, so all of our data is available to everybody. You don't have to pay for it. It's publicly available. So you can always start with USGS.gov. And that will get you to just the national website that deals with all the different areas that the USGS covers, from the mapping, earthquakes, volcanoes, down to the water resources. If you want to focus right in on some of the Kansas issues and the things that we do, and getting down to the data that we collect, a good place to start is ks.water.usgs.gov, and that will take you a more direct route to get to the data that we collect out here.
Well, it's interesting because it is, you know, like I say, it is a government agency, taxpayer supported. It's great those numbers are out there. And I think most people that are watching are going, boy, I've probably never been to that site. But when you take a look at it, what water means to us, how important that is, keeping and at least knowing the direction of flow or the direction of availability of water is so important. Some of us have city wells. Where do those fit in? Do you monitor that type of thing, or do you just know your neighbor's well went dry, so yours will probably go dry soon?
Well, you know, it's not something that we've been involved with closely up to this point, at least not in the Hayes area. So.
Well, that's one of the things that, you know, when your well runs dry, it's a problem. When your wells that you're monitoring run dry, that's a real problem for all of us. So Nathan, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Doing that. Hope people go to the website and take a look at some of the numbers, not only you, but some of the other technicians do as they're out in the field doing that. Our guest has been Nathan Sullivan. He's with the USGS here, based in Hayes. And if you have any questions or comments, be sure and let me know. My address again is gary.shorman@eaglecom.net. Thank you, Nathan, for joining us.
Thank you.
And thanks for watching. The program is brought to you by Hayes Med and by Eagle Communication, our community connected.
Hayes Med is your first and best choice for healthcare. They're the only facility providing tertiary level services in this region. With more than 70 physicians and 26 specialties ranging from heart, orthopedic, spine care, cancer, obstetrics and gynecology, wound care, rehabilitation and surgery, including the Da Vinci robotic surgery, Hayes Med is your comprehensive health provider for people throughout Western Kansas. Hayes Med, helping people be healthy.